Welcome. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining me tonight. 10K, 10K subs. Pretty awesome achievement for me. Those of you who've been around for a while know kind of what my parameters were and expectations for the channel and goals and so forth. And every month we've just been blowing them all out of the water. And it's a great feeling, investing what little free time I have into this is kind of daunting to start off with. You know, time invested. It's tricky. And yeah, I just want to start off by welcoming all of you, new subs, old subs, in between. Doesn't really matter. I'm just happy you're here and happy you're enjoying the material. And yeah, it's great. For those who've maybe been around following me on Twitter for the better part of over 12 years now, it's been a wild ride, and it's only been about half that time that I've been sharing some of what I've been archiving for 10 years or so. Um, you know, Focusing primarily on the newspaper stuff recently, the last 5, 6 years. But as an avid reader, um, digitization has been fantastic. And, it was a slow trickle for me. I slowly started doing it on Twitter, which is an odd medium for it. And I found my way here. And yeah, it's been a wild ride. And I'm looking forward to the future. And yeah, as you can kind of see the thumbnail for this episode, we're going to talk a little bit more about Atlantis, one of my favorite subjects. We're going to dabble in all kinds of stuff. It'll be a bit of a review of what I've got on my channel so far. Maybe some of you that haven't seen all of my material something will stand out, and some of you that are new to the channel that you'll see um, something else that appeals to you. And it'll just kind of be a review of sorts, right? And we'll do this all over again, whenever 20K comes. But yeah, I expected 10K. My goal was originally to hit 10K by the 10th month, and 12K by December, and we've been destroying that. That's been fantastic. Really has been motivating me to put in all the work to get all this material organized, because it was just haphazardly clipped. And before I started this channel, I had over 10,000 clippings with, not saving actual publishing dates and locations and stuff like that. And slowly over time, that's gotten better. So when you're dealing with such a huge amount of material that's completely unorganized, the first time I started organizing material was when I was like, it'd be really interesting to go state by state. And that's what kind of motivated the Anomalous America series. And that's been fantastic. It's really been great for me, because it's not only am I going back through material, you know, it's like I haven't, it's like seeing some of it for the first time. And it's really been great as far as how things kind of building a story, so to say, in my mind, and as well creating kind of a story for you guys. And yeah, it's been uh, it's been a lot of work, and it's been very rewarding. And you guys have been played a pivotal role in that. And I've through doing Anomalous America, I've really kind of ignited a few off brand, so to say, series, just through an abundance of material that I felt like there's no way I can fit all this in one episode. So let's start a little series. And I kind of got ahead of myself, but that's okay. It'll give a lot of different avenues for people who are maybe interested in different subjects. And, radium and Etruscan history and lore and language and so many things, false chronology, history, what, you know, what lies beneath our feet, showing that the realm is really kind of a um, lattice of civilizations. and starting even in Alaska, right, with episode 1, which is probably one of my favorite, to be honest, which I never thought I would say when I was first organizing the material for. But, it really is a perfect identifier just because it's so far north, and coming from a perspective that have I lean towards the idea, and I'm not one to say I believe something wholeheartedly or 100% or anything quite like that. Instead, I'm just trying to kind of build a picture or a narrative, um, contrary to the common story. And I certainly don't want to convince anybody of anything. And a big misnomer, I think, that comes from a lot of this is that, I don't believe everything that I post. And belief is kind of a slippery slope in a sense. Um, when people talk about, AI and digital information easily being manipulated, and these things have always crossed my mind. And that's not going to stop me from reading or looking. And even if I didn't have this channel or Twitter, I would still be reading newspapers. It's just become something I love. And before that, I was reading books religiously. You know for those who don't know, in 2007 I had a motorcycle accident, and should have been paralyzed. I probably should have died, but I should have definitely been paralyzed. I mean, we're talking, an absolute blessing that I'm not in a wheelchair today. And had an out of body experience, and I invested the following, 6 months or more of recovery time to really reading as much as I could about what that was and what it meant. And this is the first time I really ventured into the ideas of consciousness and understanding, different forms of it, and near death experiences and how other people experience those. And, fast forward to where we are today, I've probably read, you know, I don't know, light estimate 500 books or so of all different subjects. I just kind of let my, um, subconscious steer what I read. I don't try to go too much into forcing a certain, topic. And that's been great with the newspapers, because you won't believe where you just let your subconscious type something into the, search engine, and what you find is quite mind blowing. It leads you on this rabbit hole. So yeah, um, it's been interesting. And to think that, what is it, 17 years, 2007, 16 years, 16 years or so, 17 years in October, something like that. I don't know. My math's not very good, but a long time for me, and in that time I've gotten married and had several children, 3 boys, and they've really shown me a whole new, um, idea of consciousness, and um, the kind of, um, script, so to say, the script of life. And yeah, it's interesting. And to always try to stay humble and kind of keep that edgy bewilderment side of you alive, and always look for the next, um, aha moment, so to say, right? And yeah, YouTube has been fantastic for that for a lot of us, I'm sure. Without this medium, I wouldn't, have all you guys. And it means a lot to kind of like have a voice, so to say, like kind of creating material now as opposed to consuming material, if that makes sense. It feels like a turn in my life, kind of. Um, yeah. And for those of you out there, artists or whatever, whatever you do for work, um, being happy or proud of something you create is fantastic. You kind of get that feeling that it's not like work, so to say, right? They added the age old statement, you never work a day in your life. You do something you love. And, I don't want to make this seem like work, but there are laborious things in everything. And this included, organizing an archive is, eh, you know, not makes me nauseous. It's overwhelming. It's just terabytes of material. But having a community like this and people that join in, and the comments, I never thought that everything would be so overwhelmingly positive. Just growing up, not growing up, but spending the last decade or so in the YouTube era, it, especially in this kind of counter narrative culture, you're used to seeing um, opposing views being um, received quite skeptically, if not very negatively. And to see like a 99% average positive, it's amazing. It's great. I never expected that, to be honest. A lot of this material can be quite edgy, and I was worried how long the channel would even last on YouTube, and I haven't had one negative experience. So that's been fantastic. Knock on wood, of course. Um, yeah. So there's that. I just kind of wanted to kind of give a little background for anybody new tuning in, and even the people that are kind of like halfway through. And yeah, I don't do things like this very often. I don't really do live streams alone, unless I'm doing the Anonymous America thing where I have a script, so to say, lined out. And although I will be talking about kind of so-called scripted material, and as you can see by the thumbnail, we'll be reviewing some things, but there's quite a lot of material I have here. And I'm hoping to do a little with a lot and not try to be too focused on one particular subject. Kind of give you um, like I said earlier, a rundown or a kind of a flashback of what I've done in what is it? It's been 5 months, almost 5 months. February, yeah, almost 5 months. Feel it's that weird feeling with memory, where sometimes when you look back through all the material, it's like holy smokes, it's a lot, but then it doesn't feel like I've been doing that long at all. So yeah, it's a great feeling, and to want to keep going and post material every day and like be thinking about what I can add to the channel is pretty amazing. It feels like my own little personal archive that's available to all you guys. And yeah, it's a cool feeling, to have something up on the internet that's being watched at all hours and for the most part being received very well. It's a great feeling. For the sake of time, and time is your most valuable resource. Don't ever forget it. And make the best of the time you can. So I'm grateful for you, and you'll hear me say this all the time that you being here is a blessing to me, and I won't ever try to waste your time. So we're gonna share this article here, and it's gonna lead us into a whole rabbit hole. We're gonna bounce around a little bit. We're gonna talk about maybe a little lodestone stuff, maybe a little bicameral mind, definitely some radium material, some Lemuria, some Atlantis, a little bit of everything, and kind of show how that's all kind of interwoven with this reality we find ourselves in, and what that means for for the future. Or yeah, you don't ever have to think about it like that, but I definitely like to think about the past as part of the future. And yeah, research is research, and conjecture is always part of it. That's what I tell everybody. Do that thing with the newspapers. The number one complaint I get is yellow journalism, and you can't believe what these people were saying, and take it with a grain of salt. You just read these things and just to hopefully feel a little bit alive, or that fun fascinated feeling of new material, which can be hard to find in this kind of um counter historical narrative niche we find ourselves in, on not just on YouTube, but on the internet in general. And I kind of want to be a breath of fresh air in a sense, and just kind of cover as much of a wide range of subjects as I can, and just kind of show you the mere reflection of the stories we hear about today. And yeah, um, let's get into it. Thanks again for everybody. Brett, JJ, Many Feathers, Alice in Wonderland, Robert, as always. Robert's here like every episode. Joe Cool. Joe, I appreciate you. Always looking out for the channel. Hi World, hi Norway. If you're in Norway, that's pretty awesome. My members, I'm so grateful for you guys, and I hope you're digging the Atlantis and Lemuria stuff. Um, the last episode, it's taken me a few days to get together, but the last episode for the Lemuria series is coming out tomorrow. So members, stay tuned for that. The Mercy Seat, thanks for being here. Yeah, everybody in the chat. I'm so grateful for you guys. Let's jump in this material here and not waste any more time. So, like I said, and like you can see in the thumbnail, this is from 1937, and half of this is from a book that we're going to get into here, and then the other half is kind of the writer's own opinion of the material. And again, for those of you that are maybe new to the channel and haven't dug into my archive too deep, um, Atlantis is something that I love to discuss, and kind of what that means on a conscious and subconscious level, especially when you hear me talk about the bicameral mind. And um, Atlantis perhaps being symbolic of an age when man had no analog self, had no subconscious mind as we know it today, no inner dialogue, and had more of a schizophrenic mind. And what I mean by that is that they were receiving auditory hallucinations, commanding them to do everyday tasks. And that may be like a completely foreign subject to a lot of you. But one of my favorite authors, Julian Jaynes, who a lot of you listening out there will have remembered me mentioning many times. I planned on doing a whole series on his book, The Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind, but I just haven't really found a way to approach it and work it into the material quite yet. But we'll see some of his opinions on Atlantis in this episode. But yeah, let's go. Let's dive right in. Our planes, 12,000 years behind Atlantis. Ancients knew a combination airship submarine without wings or engines. Now, we're going to get into some of my radium material. We're going to get into some of my um, anomalous America material, and we're going to kind of show overlaps between what people write in the newspapers and not just kind of not so much fictitious, but Edgar Casey style um, subconscious dream state downloaded material, and kind of provide some actual physical material found, lost and found, and then lost again thanks to certain three-letter agencies and the Smithsonian and other um, academic um, associations involved in the whole concept of it all. But yeah, so let's jump right in here. And this is I'll read the kind of captions here as I usually do. This is a symbolic picture in the holy place. In the holy place. Aerial submarine vessel entering the water. These ships were common carriers in Poseidia, another name for Atlantis. So, submarine aerial vessels, cigar shaped, entering the water, entering from the air, flying straight into the ocean. Above, Resurgam, Christos, close, not to the ends, my cross. And then here is a map. We'll get into the book that part of this is written from, Dweller in Two Worlds. A map of Poseida, or Atlantis, the lost continent. Now, for some of you familiar with my background here, we're going to get into why I think there's a good evidence to show that perhaps America was Atlantis, or a home of the remnants of Atlantis. Down here, it says aerial submarine vessel used 12,000 years ago by the Poseidians, the Atlanteans, shown here in a storm. Cigar shaped, no wings, no engines, with lights moving silently. And we're going to start right over here. I'm going to zoom in so you guys can see. Airplanes are ordinary modes of convenience. Dirigibles that cross the oceans on schedule are accepted as a matter of course. The new giant clipper ships to the Orient are considered the last word in aerial navigation. Yet airships are not new. Our huge clipper ships are not the first vehicles of the air to become common carriers, nor are they Last word, though, they be in their line, to be compared to airships that were in constant usage thousands of years ago. Nor has our civilization reached the stage of development that our electricity can be likened to Nabaz, the force that was known and utilized by the peoples of Poseidia or Atlantis 12,000 years ago. The airships of that long gone age were called Valaks. There are descriptions of them, there are pictures of them, some to be found in a book dictated by Philos, a teacher from the other side of life. Other statements anent this method of transportation were given several years ago by the late Colonel James Churchwood. Colonel Churchwood was one of the very few men in the world who could decipher the Nacall writings. Now, before we finish this live stream, we're going to jump into his book. It's a book I won't cover too much because it's going to be a big part of the final episode for my Lemuria series, which will be available to everybody, but it is available um, without commercials for my members. In 2 weeks, it'll be posted on my channel, available for everybody. But we will go over some of it today, and I'll show you a free way to access the book yourself if you're interested. A free PDF. Decipher the Nacall writings, to be found on ancient tablets now held in the temples of India. These writings are said to date back 40,000 years, but it is not in India alone that such records may be found. Professor Nivens of El Paso, Texas, has a collection of them, which Colonel Churchwood read. They were excavated in Mexico. Now, this is incredibly important because I made a lot of connections between the Yucatan as remnants of Atlantis, as well as the Mediterranean being remnants of Atlantis, or perhaps remnants of the Yucatan, because I do prescribe to the fact that there have been several events, not just one, but several, and that the deluge was probably the last of one of these major cataclysms, and that they didn't just necessarily cover the globe, but they happened to distinct regions. So certain regions had different events at different times. Mexico's a big connector to this, and if you've watched my Etruscan series, and you'll see the correlations I make between the Etruscans, showing that they were one of the founders of Rome and built some of the most incredible cities and established their laws, their colosseums, everything that you think of in ancient kind of concepts of Rome were Etruscan founded, and that the Etruscans have a direct relation to Mexico. In fact, the people you found there in Mexico are what many authors have postulated were hybrids of Etruscans or interbreeding of Etruscans and quote Aztecs. And what that meant for rewriting history is really important, as well as the fact that their language was shrouded in mystery for hundreds of years, and that the quote Romans we know today went to extreme lengths, just as the Spanish did in Mexico, to annihilate their language, their religion, and all of their history. And they took over their cities. And I've gone into this in the Etruscan series again, so I don't want to repeat too much. But Italy, as we know it today, owes its owes a huge nod to the Etruscans and how I bridge the gap between them and Atlantis, and also the Finnish and the Kalevala, and that their mythos overlaps almost identically, and that the quote Khan or Khans of Tartary, Mexico, the priest kings, the druids, the sages, all these people represented this singular religion. And they didn't really call it a religion then, but this singular understanding of one energy, of kind of the monad. People have heard me talk about Janus, and anyone familiar with the Black Sheep researcher, um, we plan on doing a video together. So stay tuned for a great talk with him, where we're going to nail out some really amazing Janus material and connect the worship of the monad and Janus to this earliest religion of sorts. But back to this, right? We're excavated in Mexico. So they're finding tablets not only in Mexico, but in India. The ancients knew a combination airship and submarine. It was a vessel unlike anything we know. There are no wings, no propellers, no engines. They were controlled by resistance, keys and repulsion keys, with other gadgets that permitted operators to set their course high above Earth storms or submerge beneath the seas. Or these ships could be held stationary at any height. Now, again, and I apologize, I'm going to kind of pop in and out of the article as things come to my mind. For those who have found me through Dr. Longo and Old World Florida, a good friend of mine who I've done quite a few, um, live streams with and partnered up, kind of, so to say, on several videos. We share a very similar opinion of history, and it ties in nicely with that. And I've people have heard me talk about Edgar Casey's opinions on Atlantis and their um, historical references to technology, and yeah, and this is going to tie in with that very much so. They could be set directly, yeah, above a tempest, and through crystal windows could be watched the wild play of the elements. And I've also, kind of hypothesized, and when you read enough of the Blavatsky material, take of that what you will, but it's definitely worth reading. She talks about the root races, and that in some of these root races, the same technology existed. And yeah, I think that's an important overlay because we're going to see some correlations with some of these secret societies and the information that they're keeping from Atlantis and remnants of such. Okay. The Valaks were so constructed that their action could be regulated to conform to the Earth's vibrations. Hence, travel was as comfortable with as little moving sensation as though passengers were in their own homes. Right? No G forces, essentially, I think is what the takeaway is I'm getting from this. And for people that are familiar with some of this so called alien or Aryan, right? When we're talking about root races and advanced technology, India and Mexico, home of some of these older root races, kind of the Atlantis, land before ice, relating to the Aryan. That when you hear the word alien in today's culture, I think it's a direct correlation to Aryan. And I don't necessarily mean that as a phenotype. People get this confused. This isn't a skin color. Aryans weren't white or black or brown or any of these things. Um, and that this Aryan age in India correlates nicely with this material we're reading here today and with Mexico. And that I believe strongly that radium was one of the chief substances, metals, um, utilized and harvested for this technology. And we're going to get into a little bit of some material that I plan on doing a full video for on my radium series. But we're going to look at some of these um, robber baron types and what they were writing. They were writing their own books about radium. John Jacob Astor, and some others, and what they say about radium. It's quite interesting. These vehicles were equipped with televisions and wireless telephony. They were furnished with heat controllers, air conditioners, and indirect lighting. They were motivated by a force or energy that we, as yet, have not discovered. The same force that was used to heat, light, and condition homes and public buildings, to operate machinery and furnish street transportation. For the Poseidians who accepted the conveniences as a matter of course, just as we do today accept our electric lighting, our automobiles, and our airships. Television and wireless telephones were perfected in the name Niam. I may be I'll pronounce a lot of things wrong in this one, so just bear with me. A great polished metal disc that was tuned in much as our radios today, except that it was not necessary to use tubes or any type of wiring. This force, Navaz, was the finer vibrations of what we know as electricity, or it might be termed the cosmic rays, harnessed and subjected to the will of man. Now, as we get further into the radium series, we're going to see why this is important and the idea that lightning as we know it today is caused by radium emanations. Radium emanating from our oceans, right? Radium exists in the oceans. The majority of it exists at the equator. The warmest water contains the most radium. In fact, it heats the water. And a study in the 70s testing the ocean waters found that the Gulf of Mexico contained the largest concentration of radium. They've tested the rivers of America, South America, I'm sure the world. Again, this correlates nicely with my material, again, with Dr. Longo, and I have a lot of this in my radium series, talking about the elixir of life and the fountain of youth being radium infused spring water, as well as radium emanations or radium steam. The cultural sauna bathhouse, the Roman bathhouse that's owed to the Etruscans who got it from the Finnish, right? We're aware of the sauna. These terms and things all come from radium emanations, life rejuvenating, right? Um, yeah. So again, I don't have enough time, but for anyone new to my work, you can find this in my radium series. It covers all kinds of material, from aerial, the secrets to aerial flight, to the secrets of the fountain of youth, to superhuman, right? The X-Men, Marvel, radium correlation is gigantic, and I'm working behind the scenes with a friend of mine, and we plan on releasing a video maybe this week, and in the future doing a series together where we dive into popular culture, comic books, movie series, television, and show how they're constantly flashing these same narratives that I believe are directly related to radium. X-Men, anything comic book superhero driven is based on experiments that were taking place in America and Germany, Poland, in the early 1900s, late 1800s, and we're having pretty amazing results. Creating giant animals, giant people, even, believe it or not. So yeah, let's get back to where we were. Finding right cosmic rays. So cosmic rays is really important because the cosmic rays of radium are immense. The rays of light that issue from radium move at near the speed of light, slightly slower, and they penetrate all materials, even lead, even very thick lead. The more the radium, the more they penetrate the material, and that their energy can be impregnated onto other materials, and that crystals, all kinds, diamonds even, absorb the light rays of radium and store them like batteries. And as they fill with energy, the colors of the materials change. And a diamond and a quartz will turn orange. So clearer crystals will turn orange, and like the light rays of the sun. And the radium emanations could be emitted through controlled um, dispersion, like a laser beam, and that this correlates nicely with the Atlantis crystal technology. People have heard me talk about this with Edgar Casey's readings. He gets into this a little bit more than anybody else. But yes, back to the article. All of this information and much more along scientific lines was given here in California more than 50 years ago. The subject matter was dictated by Philos, a teacher from the other side, to Frederick S. Oliver, whom he called Amanuensis. Again, I'll mutilate a lot of words in this one. This was long before airships were known, before wireless telegraphy, much less wireless telephones were thought of, before television was dreamed, before electricity as a motivating power was accepted, and long, long before our famous Dr. Robert A. Millikan had commenced the study of cosmic rays. Further, there are many persons still living who not only knew young Oliver and his family, but the facts of the writing of the book as well. Now, this is pretty interesting, and anyone that's dug really deep into Tesla will know that he was also communicating with, quote, somebody from the other side, and that he was a seer of sorts. And although he didn't give too much detail on it, he did admit that many of his ideas came from, quote, entities, and that there were good and bad entities, and that the bad ones were trying to teach him how to make weapons. And that in the later part of his career, these, quote, entities, take of this what you will, he finally gave into them and started creating weapons. And I've postulated that his relocating to Colorado was directly related to his radium work. And though early in his career, when he still was in New York, he poo pooed, so to say, radium. But as Edison and many others started to invest quite a large amount of money into radium, I believe he was motivated by this. And the Radium Institute in Colorado, where Colorado again had the largest amount of mined potential for radium in the world, I do believe there's a correlation here. We'll find that CERN owes a lot of its hadron technology to radium work. And further on in my radium series, we'll get into this more. And also the quote atomic age and creation of bombs is directly tied to radium. And I do believe Tesla was relocated for this very purpose. And yeah, and his weapons developments started there. In describing the aircraft, Philo said the Valix were of four standard lengths. Number one was 25 feet, number two, 80 feet, number three, something like 150 feet, while the largest was yet 200 feet longer than the third. So 350 feet. They were long, hollow needles of aluminum like metal. Now, remember that because we're going to get into another article that I posted a long time ago where a certain person finds a interesting type of exotic metal that gets buried by certain governments, and that correlates nicely with this. So I'll read it again. They were long, hollow needles of aluminum like metal formed of outer and inner shells between which were thousands of T braces, an arrangement productive of intense rigidity and strength. All the partitions made other braces of additional resistant force. From amidships, the vessels tapered toward either end in sharp points. Most of the Val-Ixi were provided with an arrangement allowing, when desired, of an open promenade deck at one end. Windows of crystal of enormous resistant force were in rows like portholes along the sides. A few top and others set in the floor, thus affording views in all directions. I might mention that the Valix I selected for our vacation trip was 15 feet 7 inches in its greatest diameter. In his book, Philo speaks of the power that drove the great ships. That was, in fact, utilized for every form of mechanical control as electricity. Yet it would not be so called today. In putting it into our language, he said, we drew our electrical energy from the waves beating on the ocean shore, more largely from the rise and fall of the tides, from mountain torrents, and from chemicals. Now, remember what I said about ionization and radium. Um, I think this is kind of a nod to this same concept I was mentioning. You know, that if electrical forces, static electricity moving with the ether, could be harnessed for atmospheric reasons, which, again, if you're new to my material, I post a lot about atmospheric um, phenomenon and how writers were postulating things like antennas were made of radium. And I'm sure many of you have kind of heard the quote Antiquitech concept, and that these antennas played a large part in this. But when you impregnated these antennas with radium, they created a gigantic ionized um, area that would literally attract the lightning, harness the lightning. And I've gone as far as to do decodes on Back to the Future, and um, the traveling at 88 miles an hour, and there's so many nods to radium in that movie. It's pretty insane. Maybe one day I'll do a live video breakdown of Back to the Future and kind of show my radium opinions of the movie. But yeah, it's an important thing that he's touching on here. He's talking about ionization and the kind of so-called electrical potential lying hidden in the ether or the atmospheric energy, but chiefly from what might be termed the night side of nature, right? The dark energy, as it's called. There is no empty space; it's all etheric. High grade explosives were known to us, but our employment of them was of much wider range than thine. If thou couldst cause these substances gradually to yield up their vast imprisoned force without fear of explosion, thinkest thou that thy machinery would long be propelled by clumsy, because ponderous steam or electric engines? I apologize, that's an odd sentence. The perpetual steam engine was a reality, and the Germans had perfected it before radium had even been quote discovered by the Rockefeller institutions. And this is what was powering the dirigible and the Zeppelins, the Graf Zeppelins, that made Germany so powerful. And they were using perpetual steam engines. And I've gone as far as to say that they were even using impregnated steam water with radium. One of the chemicals or uh, um, one of the materials part of that's created as part of the breakdown of radium is helium. And so, what better way to have essentially endless steam energy to propel your ships, but also all the helium you would need to keep your zeppelins afloat? And the Germans had a tight grip on radium mining. In fact, they controlled almost all the radium mines in the world um, until about 1920, 1915, when the federal government stepped in and by force took all of the radium mines in America and worked slowly to get them back from Brazil and other people. Back to the article here. Then, but not alone, this resource of power was ours. Indeed, it was to our forces of the night side was alcohol as alcohol vapor is to thy steam engines. Yeah, so I think night side forces are etheric, atmospheric. What are they? At this place I will answer only but a counter question, namely the force of nature, of gravitation, of the sun of light, whence is it? If thou wilt answer me, it is God. So then will I make answer that likewise man is the heir to thy father, and whatsoever is his son's also. If Inkel, the son, is impelled by God, the son shall find how his father doeth this thing, and shall presently do likewise again, even as a man once did in Poseidon. Philos said there was one energy, one substance. So people again have heard me talk about the fifth element, and the which was if you go far enough back in alchemical studies, the fifth element was the quintessence, um, the ether, and I do believe that this is essentially kind of that monad of energy, um, where all matter issues forth. The Poseidians had allied themselves with nature, raised themselves to the point of understanding finer vibratory rates, and that we, too, would eventually know the benefits of deriving our energy from Navaz. He prophesies that our scientists will do more than did those who lived in Atlantis. He said that our scientists would apply to the astronomical telescope a force freed of such vibrations as produce sound, heat, and light, and that resistance would be superadded to the light vibrations, constituting the image beheld through the telescope, thus amplifying our knowledge and permitting a study of planetary conditions, of which savants know only dream. The particular application of this force belongs to the 20th century, according to Philos, and it will be the first time such energy will have been discovered and controlled on this planet. The tale of the writing of the story of Poseidia intrigues the interest of students as well as the imagination of those of a lighter trend of mind. This is the brief chronicle. In 1866, a son was born to Dr. and Miss F. S. Oliver in Washington, D.C. To Dr. Oliver was a noted physician. The majority of his friends and acquaintances of the Oliver family in the West thought him the only child. In reality, he was the second. Miss Irene Benton, residing on West 24th Street, Los Angeles, a warm friend of Miss Oliver, said, "Yes, I knew Miss Oliver well. It is not difficult to understand why the preface of the book states Frederick was the only child, though. Miss Oliver told me that there had been a baby boy many years before Frederick, that he was fragile and lived only a few years. Naturally, she was heartbroken when he died, for she was not a young woman then, and it was thought her childbearing days were over. Finally, she was told in a dream or a vision by a teacher, later identified as Philos, that the physical organism of the firstborn was not strong enough for the task awaiting the ego incarnated therein. He promised her her son should come again in a much stronger body. Several years later, there was a baby, and the parents named him for their other lad, Frederick. When Frederick was 2 years of age, the Olivers decided to come west. They settled in Eureka, California, where Dr. Oliver built up a splendid practice. Frederick was idolized. He was permitted to do about as he pleased. He was not studious, did not attend school regularly, took no interest in serious things. In fact, he was just a happy go lucky chap, following usual boyish trends. In his 17th year, he commenced seeing mental pictures and hearing mental lectures. At first, he paid no attention. He was not concerned with any happenings along lines of spiritism or occultism, although his mother had been studying spiritualism for some time. As the weeks passed, the impressions became so strong that he took cognizance of them, and finally, so impressed was he that he took to spending much of his time in his room alone. He became quiet, almost morose, but refused to share his secret with anybody. Now, this is interesting because when you read stories about, um, yeah, I use the word lightly, but psychics or people that have sort of, you know, interdimensional um, conversations, abilities, or see things, or hear things, or experience different type of, I don't want to say hallucinations, but experiences that maybe perhaps the rest of us don't. And I hate using the word rest of us, but I'm postulating here that when you look into Julian James's theories, these things kind of correlate nicely. That he talks about the schizophrenic mind. Now, schizophrenia kind of has a negative connotation, but he shows that the psychic, or quote psychic, or people that have these kind of psychic phenomena happen to them, are more inclined to have a schizophrenic brain. And this correlates with what I was pointing out, that um, perhaps in ages of a bygone past, that humankind as we know it, the brains were completely different, and that we were all schizophrenic, or receiving auditory hallucinations, or the voice of God, so to say, and that through an eventual cataclysm, that the brain was fractured in a sense, and the analog eye. Um, well, some of you know me by analog. That's where I got the name from. The kind of conscious mind came online. That inner voice that you have, that dialogue you have with yourself inside your head, um, that didn't exist. Um, Kind of like an animal mind, right? They are self-aware to a sense, but they have no kind of conscious, subconscious dialogue as we know it today. And so I just wanted to point that part out, that this child is kind of reverting back to a sort of schizophrenic type of mind. And again, I don't look at that. I don't like that word. Um, I think this happens to a lot of people, and they keep it a secret, as this boy did. Later in life, he said, I finally yielded to parental authority and told of my visions when my father insisted that he was determined to stop my approaching impeccability. Impeccability? Impeccability? My apologies. Never, never seen that word. But yeah, so like, in the early 1900s, late 1800s, you didn't tell people this, you'd end up in some insane asylum. And again, people that have spent enough time in this niche on YouTube will be aware of what the insane asylum was, and how they nicely go along with resets. And the list of things that you could be put in an insane asylum for is extensive. So even if you had a child who was speaking to you openly, you did what you could to keep him quiet, and try to keep it under wraps, because that your child would be gone. Instead of scouting the tale, the Olivers were sympathetic. A circle was formed in the home, including Miss S.M. Pritchard, Miss Julia P. Churchill, and W.S. Mallory, who later moved to Cleveland, Ohio. What was obtained through this circle is not a matter of public record. However, in the year 1883, Frederick commenced his work. Philos dictated the manuscript. The work was always done in the evening, sometimes early, sometimes late, long after the family were abed. And again, jumping out here, if you aren't familiar with Edgar Casey's, his books are incredible, and the material that he was put in a trance, and the material that that he wrote on, and eventually his children put into different books, is quite incredible. Some of it's a grain of salt, but again, these are all things you should absolutely look into, and use your own intuition to filter out what you disagree with or agree with. The story was not given in continuity. Chapters would be written backwards. The last chapters were written first, and the boy did not know what he was penning most of the time. All of this book took place in 1883, 1884, under the shadow of mysterious Mount Shasta. Funny correlation here, folks. Kind of talking about the alien Aryan connection. Mount Shasta was originally named Mount Shastika. s- the symbol of which was the swastika. The oldest symbol, essentially. There are obviously, um, ways of debating this, but considered one of the oldest symbols. And you can trace this symbol like language all around the world. These quote priest kings of this bygone era, the mystic peoples of whom are spoken of in the book. In 1886, the family moved to Santa Barbara, where the book was completed. There, Dr. Oliver practiced only a few years. It was there that Dr. Oliver died. In the same year, Miss M. E. Moore of Louisville, Kentucky, typed the entire manuscript in duplicate. As late as 1899, she retained her copy intact. The original story was never changed, although it was, of necessity, edited, for Frederick was not a scholar. In 1894, he copyrighted the book twice, the second time owing to a change in the title page. He died shortly thereafter, only 28 years of age. Miss Oliver lived the last years of her life in Los Angeles. For a long time, depended upon friends for food and shelter until finally the book was taken over by the present publishing company, when royalties were paid to her. As has been stated, the valix of the Poseidians required no heavy machinery nor fuel tanks as do our modern airships. There was no necessity for ballast as in our dirigibles. Hence, all the space was utilized for the comfort and convenience of the passengers, save for the small control room where was stationed the conductor of the craft before a set of keys. There were no parachutes nor their equivalent. They were not needed. The Valaks were safe. The Poseidians experienced no danger from engine troubles. Their knowledge of the subtle forces of nature so transcended our understanding in this age that the idea of failure of a ship to respond to the directing key was undreamed. Long journeys were taken both for pleasure and for profit. Business was carried on with other nations through the transportation facilities of the Valaks. Exploration jaunts were facilitated by the use of this ship, requiring neither water nor fuel, yet answering every demand or whim of the user. Poseidians sent out colonization parties to other lands, as do our moderns. The colonists were in constant touch with their parent land through the aerial mode of travel. Because of the perfect synchronization that could be obtained through the regulating keys and the vibrationless movement of the Valaks, passage from one ship to the other was accomplished without difficulty. This fact is clearly evidenced when Philo speaks of a friend joining him and his party for a few hours. The personal Valaks of the friend followed. When the visit was ended, a call through the name brought the smaller vessel alongside. The two Valaks were brought into position. The doors opened, forming a passage over which one might walk as comfortably as from one room to another. In short, the airships of the ancients were perfected. In this era, one looks with awe upon the auto gyroscope that can be settled straight from the sky into a highway. The gyroscopic apparatus folded down, wheels released, and the vessel rolls along as an automobile. When desired, the gyroscopic apparatus is unfolded, the vessel takes to the air with wheels retracted, and it is an airship again. Besides the Valaks, the gyroscope is cumbersome. In Poseidia, the Valaks were not employed for street transportation. Their system of street conveniences, driven by navas or the night forces, were perfected along different lines. Valaks were strictly equipped for air. So they kind of again make reference to what I was saying earlier about, even the electricity that we know of, when we talk about this antiquitech concept and the use of this subtle force of nature or night forces, as this article is describing, is exactly what I was mentioning. I believe this ionization of the air through radium emanations. Mercury and copper play very important roles, right? You have to think of cathode and anode. These things. These are incredible forces. Magnetism plays a huge part of this, and controlling the circuit is kind of the force feedback essentially. Although they were known earlier during the evolution of the civilization, both steam and sailing ships were obsolete when Philos dictated his message. He spoke of the docks used only for the smaller sailing craft for pleasure, as yachts are utilized today. Being both aerial and submarine craft, phalanx could have been used in warfare had they been needed. However, the Poseidonians employed odic forces in fighting, call it death rays or control of cosmic rays. So remember what I mentioned earlier about the cosmic rays or the light rays emitted from radium were absorbed by crystals. And Edgar Casey goes into a lot of detail on this when he describes um, the crystal death rays that the Atlanteans had. He didn't really call them death rays, but he did say that the Atlanteans didn't really utilize weapons, but what they had were laser like, and they used crystals. There was a destructive force known to them as well as a constructive force, such an energy as in being barely touched upon by the chemists and physics of today. Yet, with all their vast knowledge, with their control of the secrets of the universe, termed for lack of better words, nature's forces, these people had not obtained wisdom. Their desire for power, their equivocativeness, their loves and hates dominated them. They set in motion certain causes that affected disastrous results. Even the gods cannot stay the immutable law of cause and effect. True, there were exceptions among them, as there are in all ages. But the great mass of the inhabitants of Atlantis had not learned the greatest lesson ever taught, that of self control. They succumbed to temptations, thus destroying themselves because they could not or would not rise to the majesty of directing the energy force that activated humanity. Thus, the story of Poseida, proud Poseida that sank beneath the waves, learned Poseidonians, wise beyond our wisdom, living in a glory and glamour of which we know nothing today. Who knows but that they were contemporaneous with the pre Incans and the pre Mayans, or the race that carved from the living rock the rose red city of Petra. That so intrigued T.E. Lawrence of Arabian fame, coining the pages of the olden annals and thrills to the culture and civilization that flourished thousands of years ago. An age of attainment that we are entering that will take us who knows where. Yeah. Thanks for sticking with me. Long read, long article. Definitely amazing. Lots of correlations here, and we're going to get into some of them. We got about half an hour left here, and I want to just kind of bounce around. I invested a little more time in that than I wanted to, but that's kind of what happens with me jabbering on. The book that they're discussing here, archive.org, is one of my favorite websites of all time. It's called A Dweller on Two Planets. Um, you can read it here if you're more interested in the the book that was eventually translated from the transcript of that little boy, A Dweller on Two Planets, or Dividing of the Way. Um, Man, lots of fantastic chapters. This is one that I read in about 2 days, and it was hard to put down. Some of it was just beyond me and hard to get through. You know, when you're reading stuff like that, where there's not a lot of current societal overlays, it's going to be tough to get the correlations right. But yeah, I just wanted to show you that. You can find it here. It's free. Okay, so we're not going to have time for that one, so I'm not going to read that one. We're not going to have time for that one. This is an article where they talk about Edison stealing um, this man's invention. I've talked about Edison before, and that he had advanced technology that he had got from certain inventors, and that was used perhaps in a horrible way, and that some of these fires that spread throughout all of these American cities and destroyed all these ancient buildings were correlated to these dirigibles. You know, Edison had his own dirigible, and I do believe that there was some kind of device, laser-like device, on the ship. And since it's small, I'll go into it. J.F. Bradley, a Chicago capitalist, we're right here, will fly or float. This is where we are right here for those who want to read along, is said to have perfected a combination flying submarine sailing ship. It will be propelled by the new force, liquid air. The story is guarded by Mr. Bradley, but the secret was recently learned by Dr. Cunningham, a prominent dentist of St. Louis, who had business relations with him. The inventor learned that Cunningham was a scientist and grew confident who grew confidential and showed him charts and drawings, which said were complete plans just returned to him from Edison's laboratory at Orange, New York. The model, he said, was built by Edison and proved a perfect success. In fact, Brady says that Edison wrote him that it was the most successful machine of its kind ever got up. In support of his statement, Dr. Cunningham says Brady exhibited letters that were signed by Edison and bore out his story. So basically, gained the guy's confidence, stole all of the ideas and the drawings, and gave them to Edison, and he created the ship. And you can't find any you can't find anything else about it. Go figure, right? This is like the 1920s. I wanted to jump into this one here, so we're going to stop screen, and this will be old for some of you that are familiar with my Radium series or have heard my interview with Greg at the Higher Side Chats. But this is worthy, and it correlates very nicely with the article we just read. And yeah, all 170 of you, thanks for joining me, guys. It's I've been up for 101 minutes, 1 hour and 1 minutes, and I have 10,001 subscribers, 101, a favorite number of mine. So that's fantastic. This is from 1897. This is an incredible article because this was published the year before radium was discovered and before radium was given its name, right? And there are some words used in here that tie in and correlate very nicely with some of these robber baron types who were writing very interesting books about radium and why they think it correlated with Atlantis, why that it's the marker that shows the connection between advanced technology and Atlantis, and why certain people like John Jacob Astor considered it to be the secret to aerial flight, space as we know it today, um, extra lands, journeying to extra lands, extraterrestrial, going beyond the quote ice wall. The ice wall was written a lot in the late 1700s, early 1800s. Take of that what you will. We're not going to make this about Earth shape, but very interesting stuff. Again, this is written before radium was discovered, quote, discovered, and before it was given the name radium. So keep that in mind and why this article is so important. Not 1,000 miles from the Golden Gate may be found residing a man of quiet, unobtrusive presence, living in a snug cottage overlooking the ocean, surrounded by perhaps 3 or 4 acres of vineyard. The product of the vines is not, however, his chief means of support. The gentleman is well fixed, as the term is, in matters of finance, and the vineyard is simply a means whereby he is enabled to pursue his particular studies uninterrupted by the curious. So the vineyard provides blocking from the neighbors, essentially, who might otherwise intrude upon his labors, whereas suppose that he was not what he appears to be, and in that locality, a grape grower, right? That's his front. The cottage is a small dwelling of perhaps half a dozen rooms, and beside it is a long one-story structure, at the end of which is a tall lattice fence thickly covered with vines, which effectively hide the interior of the enclosure. The gentleman is about 50 years old. That is, he looks about that age and is evidently of foreign extraction, having dark skin, thoughtful dark eyes, and the general characteristics of the Hindu race. Now, weirdly enough, this is just a small little nod again to the Aryan connection. Again, we were talking about India, the Nahul language that was deciphered that gave all of these different examples to advanced technology, the idea of Lemuria and Atlantis and their remnants being all over the Yucatan, Peru, so on and so forth. So I just think that's an interesting little thing to not overlook. I am not at liberty to state just how I came to learn of his peculiar work, but will describe as clearly as I can what it is and leave to the thinking portion of the call's readers whatever inference they may draw. Necessarily, much of what I here write must be in the words of the gentleman himself. As I entered the garden-like enclosure beside the cottage, my attention was arrested by what I took to be a pleasure boat. It was about 12 feet long and 5 feet wide, forming a very convenient carriage for half a dozen persons. On each side of the body of the boat was a wing-like blade, hinged, and over the boat, supported by 6 slender rods, was a broad sheet of metal, larger than the breadth and length of the boat, and probably a quarter of an inch in thickness, which glittered and glistened with all the hues and tints of the rainbow. Again, remember in the previous article we talked about the sheep, the metal, the odd metal that no one could describe that looked kind of like aluminum but was a little more translucent that surrounded the material. This says essentially the same thing. And we're going to finish off this live looking at an article from Nevada in the 1800s. But the strangest part of the affair was that the boat was not resting upon the ground, but was attached to it by a couple of stout cords. So it's hovering. As I stood looking at the thing with astonishment depicted on my face, the gentleman approached the boat, which swayed to and fro about 3 feet from the ground, and placing his hand upon a metal knob just inside the boat's edge, I saw it sink to the earth, and again rise to the limit of the ropes. Not a word of explanation was offered me concerning the queer affair, but I was requested to step inside, and I followed into the shed beside the cottage. The shed proved to be a workshop. In one corner was a small gasoline engine and a dynamo. Along one side of the long room extended a workbench and shelves. An abundance of tools were present. At the further end of the room was a large furnace, now cold, and on the shelves were a number of elaborate electrical instruments. I saw on the workbench a piece of the same material as that of which the boat cover was made, and I took it in my hand. It was very light and was evidently some kind of metal. My host smiled as I examined the material and asked me what I thought of it. I asked, "What is it?" "Radium," he replied. "It is a metal. I am not aware that it is obtained except in Tibet, on the southern slope of the Himalayas, near Tirthapuri, and here on the western slope of the Coast Range. It occurs in the soil as telluride, and the metal occurred by thoroughly washing the soil, rejecting all portions that are not dissolved by water, then evaporating the solution. The solid portion remaining is the form of an impalpable powder, is then subjected to a peculiar process of electrification, resulting in the production of what you now have in your hand. It is exceedingly strong, its tensile strength surpassing that of steel. Its iridescence is due to the microscopic wrinkles upon its surface. But that is not all the characteristics. It is possesses the remarkable qualities of being easily rendered apergent. Important word, apergent. What? I exclaimed. Apergent, he replied. Apergy is a force obtained by blending positive and negative electricity with ulth- ultheic, the third element or state of electric energy. And a body charged with this fluid, apergy, is not only unaffected by gravitation, it is repelled from the earth with the same or greater force than with that with which it formerly was attracted, so that if the body is liberated, it will move away into space. Radium is as yet the only material I know of that will retain the apergic force, kind of like the crystal-like energy we were talking about earlier. You surely must, as a chemist, know, said my host, that neither synthetical or analytical chemistry will satisfactorily account for certain phenomena constantly occurring. The world will never learn true science until it is ready to learn from nature's open books, correlating nicely again with what they were saying, nature's energy. Everything in the material universe is constructed upon a system of triads. In other words, there are always three phases or conditions of the same thing. Water may be a solid, a liquid, or a gas, and in each manifestation be only water, being only one, but it can transmute in between the three. Just so in everything, electricity is known to the many as only positive and negative, while in fact its third condition is never absent, although unrecognized. Now, this is again important when we were talking about um, the etheric forces in the ether and the quintessence, the fifth element. An apple falls to the ground from the tree, and science announces that a subtle force called gravity brought the apple down. But as to the second or its third phase, science knows nothing, and in fact, it's apparently too conceited to desire to learn. I have learned something about the opposite force, the second phase of gravity. I call it apergy. Now, look for in my radium series to where we start diving into apergy, and who not coined the phrase, but took the phrase and ran with it, and that's John Jacob Astor, and why I've postulated that the Titanic sinking had more to do with the battle over radium than it did with anything else. The boat that you saw swaying in the yard has its roof stored with apergy sufficient to cause it to lift the boat with me in it and soar to any height that I may wish to reach. But I asked, how can you control your ascent and descent? Simply enough, he answered. The inner sides of the boat are lined with a my apologies, with a number of thin bands of specially prepared metals, forming in fact a very powerful storage battery. Now remember in the previous article he talked about this, that they were layering with gaps in between this strange metal, this strange almost translucent white metal in layers with little gaps between. Powerful storage battery of the dry type, so no liquid is required. Perhaps you might better understand it by comparing it to a Leyden jar, only its discharge is slow, not all at once. There are two complete systems of these bands, each insulated from the other. When I use the boat, I first charge one set of bands with positive electricity from yonder dynamo, and then charge the other set with negative electricity from the same source. Then I join the like poles of the two systems and, of course, thus connected, get no current that would be measurable by any ordinary galvanometer. One system is neutralizing the other, but now, using the two systems of bands connected as a single circuit, I charge them with a further current of what you may call static electricity. Now, this is important because this ties in with the etheric energy that we were mentioning earlier, which applied to certain material capable of storing it, as does radium. And remember, radium crystals and the ionization of the ether, the exciting of the ether vibrations, right? Because the radium emits light, an incredibly high vibratory light that allows it to penetrate almost all metals. And he's talking about how he's storing it and how it excites the ether, right? Produces apergy in that material. I can weaken or destroy the apergy in the radium by a reversal of the direction of the applied current. This is what I was mentioning earlier with the anode and cathode. Thus, I am able to increase or diminish the buoyancy of the boat. Did you ever think what was the marvelous power that maintains the planets in their position as regards to the sun? Gravity alone will not fill the requirements. Now, again, in my radium series, I talk about the sun um, really being radium, and that scientists um, were hooting and hollering when they said, "Oh, the sun is just a giant ball of radium, and you don't have to worry about it burning out. It never will happen." Gravity alone will not fill the requirements. Yeah, the force alone would simply precipitate them upon the sun. But apergy acting with gravity holds them as they are. The apergic force of the sun repels and his gravity attracts. In the meantime, as the sun is swiftly moving himself through space, right? The satellite's moving himself through space. Again, fixed. The sun is doing the moving. Is moving with him, and the apergic force harmoniously blended with the gravic force circles them around the central power. For this reason, the two forces are never always exactly of the same intensity. They regularly alternate. One is always a little more powerful than the other. Nothing in nature is absolutely uniform. She abhors many things besides a vacuum. Now, this is something else I've correlated in my radium videos when I talk about earthquakes, that radium dissolves stone. It dissolves all things, but even up to granite and even things harder than that. And that it creates a cavity in the earth. And when these cavities give way, they create earthquakes. Radium also creates lava, and that the volcanic forces are driven by radium, the movements of the oceans, so many things. So, yeah, nature abhors many things besides a vacuum. There is no such thing as a perfect circle in nature. So, yeah, that was really important to cover. I think it correlates really nicely with the previous article that was the thumbnail here that we stated. And for any of the newer people, maybe this motivates you to get into the radium stuff. And I just think it's so fascinating. And there's just so many correlations. And my time is limited now. My wife is pressing the alarm button. So I'm going to come to this article here. And yeah, I want to thank every one of you for being here. 180 means a lot. Again, 10,000 subs. It's a pretty big landmark for me that came much earlier than I anticipated. And I'm super grateful for that. And I'm just, trying to keep the material flowing and keep drawing in interesting interesting eyes, and I appreciate your support through this whole thing. It's been fantastic. So this is called A Wonderful Metal. It was written in Nevada, 1896. So remember this date, okay? Again, it's right. It's a year before the article I just read, and it's 2 years before radium is quote discovered. Even though that previous article shows you that radium was being discussed, and it was called radium before Madame Curie or Mercury was handed the discovery by the um, Standard Chemical Company, which was owned by the Rockefellers. Standard Oil, Standard Chemical Company, same people. And yeah, so this is going to correlate nicely. From time to time, Nevada shows up with luminous shrubs, traveling stones, petrified coral, prehistoric men, and animals. I definitely recommend checking out Anomalous America, Nevada. I think you should watch all of them. Oh, Flower Jones, thank you so much, man. Appreciate you. Thank you, all of you. But your donations, they mean a lot to me. Unfortunately, time is precious, and I got a lot of people needing my time. So the donation, they really do mean a lot to me. Thank you so much. And Flower has just been a huge supporter. So grateful. So yeah, where were we? Petrified prehistoric men and animals, mineral soap, and other wonderful products. And now she is credited with being a necessity to the airship, as to the Orville Register says. It will be remembered that some years ago a man discovered a wonderful metal in Pine Nut, Nevada. This peculiar metal was contained in clay, and the man accidentally discovered it by using some clay for a bank to his stove. Some hours after building a fire in the stove, he found that the back had disappeared, I apologize. In place of it was a clear white metal and scarcely any weight to it. Oh, thanks everybody. Jen, Hollis, thank you so much. Oh yeah, thank you. I'm grateful. And thank you for tuning in. Now that the man who discovered and used that metal was Orville yesterday, in fact, he has been here a number of days. He does not wish his name published, but we met and talked with him for 15 or 20 minutes. We do not know, of course, whether he was anything to do with this mysterious airship or not. But if there was any truth in the report of the wonderful metal discovery, it is possible that he has kept the secret and used the new metal in constructing this wonderful floating ship. No coincidences. I've talked a lot about how these government bases are tied in with the subterranean worlds that existed from previous ages, and that they choose these areas not only for their energy, but their minerals. Nevada, Utah, Colorado, the uranium, radium hotspots of the globe. So, yeah, that's it for me. Um, Cheers to 10K, Mr. C. Thank you so much. Oh, thank you. I'm glad you enjoy it. The donations are fantastic. They really do mean a lot. They help me out very much. Providing the time and things away from my family. You understand. I have a lot of obligations, and those things really do make a huge difference for me and my family. And you tuning in, I wouldn't be here without you. Here's to 10K, and I can't wait for another 10K. And stay tuned for tons more material. I'm shooting for 3 or 4 videos a week, and we're going to try and stick with that. And hopefully, there's always going to be roadblocks, with the family and everything, but we're going to do our best. And without you guys and your support, I wouldn't be here. So, cheers to a amazing August and to 20K. Here we come. Love you guys. Enjoy the rest of your day.